I'm Gary Anthony Ramsey with your Hour News Now Rewind. Stories making headlines for the week ending April 9, 2011. Our top stories include: the President and congressional lawmakers race to the end of a budget government shutdown deadline. A new biography about Malcolm X asserts the slain civil rights leader had a gay affair with a white man. His daughters are not happy with the book. The woman who made false rape allegations about Duke lacrosse players 5 years ago is arrested again. Troops storm the home of an Ivory Coast leader who refuses to accept defeat. Bad boy Dennis Rodman leads the class of the 2011 NBA Hall of Fame inductees, and the author who penned that controversial Malcolm X book dies 2 days before its release. Our top story. After weeks of disagreements, promises, and even threats, a budget deadline that threatens to shut down the government has arrived. Lawmakers were able to strike a deal after at first being more than $5 billion apart. The main sticking point at the time centered around women's health issues, including abortion, although the GOP has denied that abortion was a sticking point. With the government shutdown, more than 800,000 federal employees would have been furloughed and several agencies shut down, the first time in 15 years. The president delayed a trip to Indiana to keep a close watch on the negotiations. While the budget has been one of many issues would-be Republican presidential candidates have used as talking points, the man they want to beat made it clear he has no intention of going away. In a video released on the web, Barack Obama announced his re-election campaign.
And unfortunately, President Obama is one person. He cannot go, plus he got a job. You know, we're paying him to do a job, so we can't say, hey, could you just take some time off and come and get us all energized? So we better figure it out.
The president is not expected to have any primary challengers, but so far no Republicans have made their bid to become commander-in-chief official. On the heels of two successful fundraisers, the president made an appearance at the national conference for Al Sharpton's National Action Network this week, but new poll numbers show he may have some work to do to shore up his base. A new Gallup survey indicates the president has lost some favor in the minority community. In 2010, Obama enjoyed a 73% approval rating among Hispanics. This year, that number fell 19 points to 54%. Among blacks last year, Obama had a 93% approval rating. That number has fallen to 85%. The Gallup survey gave no indicator as to why the numbers fell, but with unemployment numbers in communities of color almost double that of whites, the economy might be the leading factor. In New York, after weeks of protests, miscues, and resignations, Kathy Black has resigned as the city's school chancellor. Her replacement is the highest-ranking African-American in the Michael Bloomberg administration. Dennis Walcott, who was deputy mayor for education, accepted the job after Black's resignation. City lawmakers and community leaders have criticized Kathy Black's appointment from the very beginning 4 months ago. She had no education administration experience, and she and her children all attended private schools. Walcott has been both student and teacher in the New York City public school system.
With my children, my grandson, we represent 4 generations of New York City public school students. To me, the great equalizer in society is ensuring that every child receives a quality education.
Walcott now has to deal with budget cuts and teacher layoffs, among many New York City education issues. A new Malcolm X biography is creating controversy and angering his daughters. ONN's Roy Paul has the story.
2 of Malcolm X's daughters say they're outraged over allegations in a newly released book that casts doubt on their parents' life and legacy. The book, titled Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention, claims that Malcolm X and his wife Betty Shabazz engaged in extramarital affairs with other people, and that Malcolm X himself had a gay fling with the white man. The daughters in question, Aliyasa and Malak Shabazz, admit they have not read the book, but they still take issue with several of its reported contents. Aliyasa told the Associated Press that their parents' marriage, quote, was definitely faithful and devoted because my father was a man of impeccable integrity. And I think most people, if they're not clear on anything, they're clear that he was moral and ethical and had an impeccable character. The book further alleges that Malcolm X exaggerated parts of his criminal past, and that previous autobiographer Alex Haley softened aspects of his past as well. Manny Marable, the author of the book, died just days before the book was released. Marable was a well-respected author, scholar, and autobiographer of Malcolm X, and had published several books on the civil rights activist. Despite the criticism, the new autobiography is a bestseller, keeping its spot on Amazon's top 10 list. Roy Paul, Our News Now.
In St. Louis, anti-abortion proponents continue their African-American roadshow with a new ad in the urban community there. The group Life Always was responsible for a sign that looked just like this one that was put up and taken down in New York City a month ago. Last week, the group sponsored a different sign in Chicago. That one had the likeness of President Obama. In Los Angeles, detectives believe they can tie 8 more victims to grim sleeper suspect Lonnie Franklin, who's already accused of killing 10 people. The 8 women were among pictures that were found in Franklin's home after his arrest late last year. More than 100 photos of women were found, and police continue to ask for the public's help in identifying the faces of those images. To see if you might know someone in those pictures, go to www.lapdonline.org and scroll down to the grim sleeper photos. In South Carolina, a state lawmaker waves the Confederate flag on the floor of the Senate to mark the upcoming 150th anniversary of the Civil War. But it may surprise you to see who that cheerleader is. Democratic State Senator Robert Ford said people should get used to seeing the image of Dixie over the next few years, and it shouldn't be an icon of division. He said, quote, "Instead of dividing yourself, talking about why the war was fought, and I don't like this and I don't like that, understand this as an African American. Before the war, you was a slave. After the war, you was free. And in 2012, you can do anything that you want to do." End quote. The first shots of the Civil War were fired on April 12, 1861, when Confederate soldiers stormed the Union's Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The state has been boycotted by the NAACP, NCAA, and other national groups because the Confederate flag is still prominent in state government fixtures and landmarks. In North Carolina, a woman who set off a nationwide racial furor with false allegations of rape against white Duke University lacrosse players is arrested again, this time for attempted murder. Crystal Mangum is being held on $350,000 bond. She's accused of stabbing her live-in boyfriend in the back and shoulder with a kitchen knife. In 2006, Mangum was originally shielded by rape laws, but as her story wavered and evidence exonerated the 3 players in question, charges against them were dropped and her identity was revealed. This is her second violent felony arrest since then. This year's tax deadline of April 18th is right around the corner. But while most of us will struggle simply to get the paperwork done, one North Carolina couple already knows what they're getting back, and it isn't exactly small change. Thelma and David Ward will be getting a refund of more than $54,000. That's right, $54,000. The Wards, who adopted 6 kids in addition to the 7 they raised, were finally able to take advantage of a clause in the new Health Care Reform Act. Families get a credit for every child they adopt over a 3-year period. Even the tax preparer was shocked by the number on the last line. A typical adoption costs families about $30,000 per child. In your Our News Now World Wrap, the people of Haiti elect a new leader, while soldiers in the Ivory Coast are trying to capture an old one. With preliminary results in, it appears that sweet Mickey Martelly will be the next president of Haiti by decisive measure. The controversial entertainer ran against former First Lady and lawmaker Milan Manigat. A final count will be announced on April 15th. It will end an almost 6-month process that started with 18 candidates, including former Fuji frontman Wyclef Jean. Martelly will now have to lead his people out of the ruins of a devastating earthquake that killed more than 300,000 people and still has more than 1 million people homeless. It also destroyed Haiti's fragile economy. In the Ivory Coast, it appears the reign of Lord Gbagbo is in its last days. His forces loyal to his political opponent have him surrounded in his home. Troops supporting Alassane Ouattara have been told to capture Mr. Gbagbo alive so that he can face charges related to his refusal to step down from power after the United Nations has he lost an election there last fall. The civil war that's erupted since that decision has killed thousands. Thousands of others in the country are displaced because of the violence. The Ivory Coast is the world's largest supplier of cocoa. In Libya, rebel leaders are asking NATO forces for more help in their effort to defeat Muammar Gaddafi and his army, who have still been winning battles on the ground despite airstrikes from the sky. Some of those airstrikes have been described as friendly fire, as seen in this video. 4 rebel soldiers were killed in this bombing as they were confused with Gaddafi forces. Meanwhile, the opposition began exporting oil from a captured town last week. Revenue from the oil is supposed to go to buying weapons and food supplies. Libya has been embroiled in a civil war since political protests for change were met with violent crackdowns more than a month ago. That's your World Wrap. In sports news, the Barry Bonds perjury trial begins to wind down as the defense rests, with no witnesses taking the stand on behalf of baseball's home run king. The government says that Bonds lied under oath to a grand jury when he said he never knowingly took steroids. Although the judge threw out one of the indictments against Mr. Bonds, he still could face jail time if convicted of any of the 4 remaining charges. There was good news for another controversial athlete this week, as former NBA bad boy Dennis Rodman leads this year's Hall of Fame class. The brash former forward was a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, 5-time NBA champion, and 7-time rebounding champion with an average of 13.1 rebounds per game, and he holds the single-season record for rebounds. His aggressive style and on-the-court bravado was only matched by his off-the-court antics that included wearing a wedding dress to marry himself. Since leaving basketball, he's been making the rounds of reality TV. He's joined in the 211 Hall of Fame class with NBA and ABA All-Star artist Gilmore and 4-time Olympic gold medalist Teresa Edwards. Arrests have been made in the shooting of a BET host and New York DJ who was killed near his home last week. Police have charged William Williams and Richard Cromwell with murder, robbery, and criminal possession of a weapon in the death of DJ Megatron, whose real name is Corey McGriff. Investigators say the two stalked McGriff for several blocks before trying to rob him. Published reports say that at least one of the suspects has confessed to being part of the crime. McGriff was a host of BET's 105th and Park segment and a DJ for several radio stations in the New York and Boston areas. And finally, he was the man who wrote that controversial book about Malcolm X. He died just 2 days before it was released. Manny Marable was a well-respected historian and social intellectual who taught at New York's Columbia University. In his new book, he says some of the gunmen who shot Malcolm X were never arrested or pursued, and that one lives openly in a New Jersey community. He's called for a new investigation into Malcolm X's assassination. Marable suffered from a lung disease called sarcoidosis and had a double lung transplant last summer. He suffered pneumonia last month and never recovered. Manny Marable was 60 years old. For a complete check of any of the stories you've seen on The Rewind, remember, as always, go to the bottom of the webpage, find the link of the story you'd like to see, and click your way through. That's your Hour News Now Rewind for this week. I'm Gary Anthony Ramsey.